Hello Year 10. Last week we had a look at an overview of the nervous system. We looked at the different divisions, looking at the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. This week we're going to begin to look at how that system operates, and we're going to use emotions as the vehicle for doing that. What I want to start off with is a knowledge check. So on the next slide, I've given you the skeleton of the diagram that we use to describe the nervous system. What I'd like you to do is either print that out or copy it, and make sure in each of those boxes you can put the correct names of those parts of the nervous system. I'm going to pause at this point to give you the chance to do that. And then on the next slide, we're going to check that you've got it correct. So this is the information that you should have in your version of this diagram. Obviously, it starts with the nervous system at the top, and then the first division is into the central nervous system, the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord, and those should be in the box on that side of the diagram, whereas the peripheral nervous system is further split into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has two divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Can you please check that all those words are spelt correctly? So in this session, we're going to have a look at one theoretical model about how the parts of the nervous system work together, specifically in emotions. And we're going to look to see how those emotions are linked with physiological symptoms. Things like a quickening heartbeat, your palms getting sweaty, butterflies in the stomach, and so on. As with last week, there are a list of keywords that you must know the meaning for. I'm going to run through the pronunciation of those words, but I'm not going to bother with the definitions. And once again, you don't have to do this with a Welsh accent. Physiological, cognitive, hypothalamus, adrenaline, arousal, social information, prompted research, phobia. I'm going to pause again just to give you a minute to have a look at the definitions of those words. And if there's any of them that you're still not sure about, please go online and look in a dictionary. So the big focus of our use of the nervous system is going to be about emotions. We all know what an emotion is, and we've actually already done some psychological work on emotions when we looked at Yuki's study of emojis, where the different cultures look at different parts of the face to gauge what emotion is being shown. Just to pull that work together, we're going to do a quick quiz, and it's all about how good we are at working out emotions. It's actually all about emotional intelligence. The link is a magazine that's published by Berkeley University in America. The link is on the screen, and you're looking for the section of the page that is illustrated at the bottom of this slide. I'm going to leave you a little while just to do that quiz. I will confess, I only got 15 out of 20, so please let me know if you actually do better than I do. So now you've demonstrated your skill and dexterity in identifying different types of emotions, although the facial expressions for some, it's quite subtle, the differences between some of the emotions. Let's begin to think on how you feel is linked into what happens in your body. I've got a simple table here. Again, you can print the slide out, or you can just copy the table onto your paper, into your books and so on. It's got 3 columns. First column, what makes you feel happy? In that column, I want you to give an example of something that gives you the stated emotion. So what makes you feel happy? Getting home after a hard day's work and taking my high-heeled shoes off. What happens in your body? So what is it that I feel when I get happy? Well, first of all, I feel my muscles relax. Apart from the muscles in my face, and I feel them change because they create a smile. I feel the tension in my head go away, and I feel any stress in my shoulders disappear. And how does your behavior change? Well, I become less abrupt. I become less snappy with people. I'm more likely to laugh, and I'm more likely to talk more. Okay, what I'd like you to do is that kind of self-reflection for each of those emotions. This is designed just to get you thinking about those emotions in more than just a word that's attached to an event. And again, I'm going to pause while you do that. So what's obvious from your self-reflection is that emotions are linked to certain changes in our bodies, certain physiological changes, some of which is internal, things like your heart rate, things that you can't really control consciously, and other things are external, like your muscle movements, the tensing of some, the relaxing of others. However, the recognizing and naming of emotions are a cognitive process. You're thinking about it, you're matching information and retrieving information. So the question is, which comes first? Is it that physiological reaction, the stuff that's going on in our body, or is it the cognitive process, the thinking process? Do you think that's scary and then start to shake and scream? Or in response to something, do you shake and scream and then suddenly go, woohoo, that means I'm scared? So I want you to imagine this. You're walking down a dark street all alone. It's cold. There aren't any other people about at all. You can see your breath pluming in front of your face. And suddenly you hear footsteps behind you. Now then, your palms get sweaty, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You can feel the muscles in your legs tensing. You're beginning to walk faster. And the question is it those physiological reactions that make you realize you're scared? Or have you processed all the social information, the fact it's dark, you're alone, you can hear footsteps, and you'd think scared, so your body reacts by making your heart beat faster, making your palms sweaty, and so on. Another example of this is you get home, you pick up your cat, you give it a hug, your cat molds itself into your body, it rubs its head under your chin, rubs its head on your cheek, you feel relaxed and you smile. Now then, do you get that warm, gooey feeling and then think, oh, I love Mr. Tiddles? Or do you pick your cat up, think, I love my cat, and then because you've thought you love him, do you get the warm, gooey feeling? And it's a very interesting question. Which comes first, the thought of the emotion or the physiological change that happens in your body? And in fact, there are times when we have physiological reactions and actually we don't have very many cognitive processes go with them. You can be with somebody, or even if there's somebody on TV and they start to cry, and you haven't got a clue why they're upset, you don't know why they're crying, but you can feel it coming on. Your throat gets tight, your jaw tightens up as you're trying not to be emotional, your eyes fill with tears, and suddenly you're crying along with them. So how come that physiological reaction has occurred when actually you've got no thought process whatsoever about why that other person is crying or even why you're upset? For a very long time, going back into antiquity, people have been interested on how emotions link to our physiological experience. And generally writers, philosophers, everybody's had an opinion about this. But it wasn't until the 1880s that we started to get theories that could actually begin to be scientifically tested. One theory was devised by two researchers working very separately, the one in America and the other in Denmark. But the theories that they came up with were so similar that they've been brought together and known as the James Lange theory. The one researcher being William James, the other one being Carl Lange. And as I said, this was written, or these theories were written back in the 1880s, about 140 years ago, late Victorian times, before psychology was really coming into its own. And what they proposed was summed up in 4 basic boxes. There is an event. The event causes a physiological arousal. That arousal is interpreted, is thought about, and then from the conclusion that comes from that interpretation, an emotion is identified that matches that pattern of physiological arousal. Event, the arousal comes first, whether that's the butterflies in the tummy, the sweaty palms, the racing heart, the, oh, I need to go to the toilet now. Those physiological symptoms are interpreted, they're thought about, and a conclusion is drawn from them, and that conclusion is the identification of the emotion. So, on the next few slides, we'll see how that works. Okay, event, arousal, interpretation, recognition of emotion. So let's have a look about how that actually works out. So you're walking down the dark street alone, you hear footsteps behind you. The arousal is all those physiological symptoms. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tense, your palms sweat. Now then, what do all these physiological reactions mean? You then interpret the physiological reactions. It's your body getting ready for action. So how do you feel? Those physiological reactions are telling you you need to be scared. Have a look again and read that analysis of the actual real life event. What I'd like you to do now is do the same kind of analysis for the holding and cuddling the cat. So there are your 4 boxes to analyze under. I'm going to let you do that, and when you've written your own version, flick on to the next slide and I'll show you what I'd written. So, cuddling your sweet little cat when you get home from school or work, that's the event. The arousal, your heartbeat slows, your muscles relax, you feel warm, and a smile happens. Now, what do all those physiological reactions mean? I'm not aroused. How do I feel? I feel love. Okay, we get the idea. Event, arousal, interpretation, emotion. You need to remember those 4 processes to be able to describe the theory. So, what exactly is happening in the nervous system during these 4 processes? Well, the event, and the theory really bases itself on threats or stresses, but can apply to anything. So, the hypothalamus in your brain activates the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. That's a fine sentence. It uses all the correct psychological language, and this is what it means. The hypothalamus is a section of your brain buried deep underneath your cortex. Okay, it's part of your very fundamental, very basic brain, and its responsibility is for releasing hormones. So it releases hormones and activates the sympathetic division. Remember this diagram? Okay, part of the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic division. The sympathetic division, which is this here, is the part that does all of the things on this diagram, and it does those because the hypothalamus activates the release of adrenaline, the hormone adrenaline, and the purpose of adrenaline is to increase physiological activity, and this is the arousal. Okay, so it might dilate the pupils, accelerate the heartbeat, increase the amount of glucose that your body is creating, because it's going to need the energy. The body is getting ready for action. We might be in the situation we need to start fight or flight. And then we go on to the interpretation. Now, in the James Lange theory, your brain is only interpreting physiological changes. It's ignoring everything else around you and just interpreting those changes that are happening in your body. And what it will do is it'll look for the pattern of changes, compared it to the information that's stored in your memory, so it can come up with some conclusion about what those physiological changes actually mean. And that then gives you the emotion. All right, the brain matches the information, comes up with an emotion, could be fear, excitement, dread, despair, love. All right, whatever emotion you have stored in your memory. Which means that if there is no physiological change, there is no emotion. You cannot feel scared without a pattern of physiological changes. You cannot recognize love without the associated pattern of physiological changes. If there is no physiological reaction, then you are not experiencing an emotion. So as with any theory, we have evaluations, strengths and weaknesses. The first point I think that we have to make about this theory is that it doesn't feel complete. It doesn't really have enough meat on the bones to explain emotions and how they link into the autonomic nervous system and how they link into our physiological experiences in full. And one of the big problems with the theory is that it suggests that for every emotion that you experience, you have to have a different pattern of physiological arousal. There are dozens of emotions that we feel we experience. And okay, some of them can be grouped together. But even with the 6 basic emotion groups, there aren't enough ways that we can mix and match our physiological arousal to be able to identify those emotions from the way that the sympathetic nervous system actually changes our bodies. So this suggests that the James Lang theory isn't accurate, that it can't just be that our emotions are identified from our physiological reactions. So that's the first major weakness of the theory. Other researchers have debated whether or not the James Lang theory is actually correct. Schachter and Singer argued that we don't just interpret the physiological changes, we're actually interpreting the whole situation at the same time. So it's not just the racing heart, the muscles tensing and the sweaty palms that are letting us know it's scared. It's also the fact that we're alone and we can hear footsteps. And those social cues, those pieces of social information, are processed along with the physiological information. So they're not arguing that you process the social information first. They have a two-factor theory that say all this processing is being done together. And again, they argue James Lang is just too simplistic. It just doesn't have enough explanation of how we decide what the emotion is. The physiological bits on their own just aren't sufficient. There are some good bits about the theory. It's really important because it prompted a great deal of research into how the body produces and interprets emotions and how we link the emotion to the situation. And it also recognizes the importance of the autonomic nervous system in emotional experiences. And that's been demonstrated by much more recent research. It's also quite helpful to describe some real life experiences, and particularly the development of a phobia. So, an individual's in public, they fall over in public, they are deeply mortified, ashamed, and embarrassed by the situation, and as a result, they develop a phobia that is linked to the anxiety that they've experienced from falling over in public. Now, a phobia is an irrational arousal that's linked to a situation. And in this case, the arousal the person experiences is caused by the anxiety. There's no social or environmental factors involved. A shopping centre in itself is not scary, but a person may become aroused by being in the shopping centre if they have a phobia, an irrational fear of being out in public. So there is no social cue that's actually being used here. It is purely an arousal that comes from a previous experience. And the James Lang theory, because it says event, arousal, interpretation of the physiological factors, and identification of the emotion, explains that situation very well. So what do we want you to do now? 5 tasks. Okay, read page 10 in your booklets. Page 10 tells you basically everything that we've done about the James Lang's theory, but in much shorter form. And then I'd like you to answer questions 1, 2, and 3. There is a proofreading worksheet in the Dropbox. All right, it's a sheet with 11 errors on it, all about the James Lang theory. I need you to find and correct the errors. And then there is a typical exam question to be answered. It is a 6-mark question. Describe and evaluate. Don't forget the balance of the marks is in the evaluation. You probably get 2 marks that are on the description of the theory explaining the 4 boxes, and then 4 marks for the evaluation. So for that, you either need 2 points in depth with real life examples, or 4 points with an explanation of each. Okay, and don't forget, you must explain what that evaluation point means. It's no good saying it explains phobias. You need to explain how it explains phobias. Okay, hope you've enjoyed that. We'll be going on next week to have a look at a bit more of the in-depth mechanisms related to the nervous system. So please make sure you've got that overall diagram fixed in your head and you understand how the nervous system is involved in emotions. See you next week.